this is Sarah from Reset Revolution. Welcome to this episode where we will be discussing about human rights in factory farming and animal agriculture. Today we'll be joined by Mian Osumi from the US, and we will be discussing various social issues surrounding animal agriculture and about the exploitation of humans and animals in creating animal products. Let us see if we can invite Mian. Our connection is slightly bad today, but hello, Mian.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And could you start off by introducing yourself, please?
Yeah, so as Sarah mentioned, I am Mian Osumi and I'm a student currently, but I volunteer for a lot of different animal advocacy organizations and environmental organizations. And today I'll be talking about animal agriculture and human rights issues because obviously you can care about two issues at the same time. You can care about multiple things at the same time, which is really important. And so, yeah, just some quick facts to get us started. So people often think of veganism as this animal rights issue only. And I think that is a really common, and I think it can be a valid criticism too. People really care about human rights issues and they think, like, why should I care about animals when there are so many humans suffering? And the fact of the matter is that these issues are super interconnected. And so some quick facts on that. The main thing I'll be talking about today is slaughterhouse work, and people that are non-citizens are 1.5 times more likely, or slaughterhouse workers are 1.5 times more likely to be non-citizens, which is obviously leaves you very vulnerable, especially in the US. If you're not a citizen, like you can be deported at basically any time. And I can talk more about that too. And also, Black and Hispanic communities are twice more represented than the actual population within slaughterhouse workers, and every minority community is overrepresented in the slaughterhouse industry. So that includes Asian Americans and Native Americans, although it's not twice as much like the Black and Hispanic communities. And the rate of injury, so we have all these vulnerable populations packed into slaughterhouse work, and the rate of injury for those people is 3.1 times that of other manufacturing workers. And there's also, as you can guess, like a lot of mental trauma that comes in with slaughterhouse work. A lot of us don't even want to watch slaughterhouse footage. Have you ever met those people that are like, I can't even watch it, like it's so disturbing?
No, honestly, like I sometimes hesitate to post content like that on my own Instagram, just because I know that there are quite a few people out there who kind of not refuse, but like, wouldn't want to see kind of the reality that does happen in order to kind of support kind of the mainstream diet.
Yeah, and I think it's really tricky because I think there can be a lot of secondary trauma that goes on with watching that footage. And I know I was like, my life is like divided into before and after I watch that footage. Like, that's how disturbing it is. But on the other hand, like, if you refuse to watch it, but you purchase it, that is leaving that dirty work to someone else. You know what I mean?
That is very true.
So yeah, there's a lot of mental trauma that comes with this work. So slaughterhouse workers have 38% higher rates of severe psychological distress and around 20+% of moderate. And this is just one study. So I feel like we should be doing more research on this as well, obviously. But this gap between slaughterhouse workers, the people that have to do this gruesome work, and the people that get to not think about this and just consume the products, this gap has always been historically there. So I'll go into that later, but there are so many interesting historical examples of this. And then if we have time, I hope we can get into environmental racism and how it connects to gender and food apartheid and all those yummy issues. But yeah, so that's sort of like an overview.
Wow, Mian, that was like a full-on kind of course. It is it is so important to address these issues because often I see how when we see these clips of slaughterhouse workers, often people
Hmm.
villainize them for doing
Yeah.
their work, but then
Hmm.
honestly, um, the spotlight is never on to like how about their rights? How about them as humans? Like we need to
Mm.
kind of look over what is their background, what has um, put them in that place today.
Yeah. No, I think that is a really good point because I think the most intense forms that we see of slaughterhouse footage, the kind of stuff that goes viral, like
Mm-hmm.
Fair Oaks, I know a couple years, and the sort of stuff that happens, the thumping, I know is a
Mm-hmm.
big, that happens in on pig farms, which is
Mm-hmm.
just for people that don't know what thumping is, it's like when you're trying, like the baby piglets that they can't make use of anymore, they bash their brains out as like a humane method of slaughter. But anyways, the stuff like that comes out, it's obviously going to be the people that seem to be enjoying it because that's what is most shocking. And it is shocking. And I'm sure that happens. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it happens on a systemic level as well because I think you do get desensitized.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also understanding, as horrific as that behavior is, that slaughterhouse workers are they're put into the perfect soup to become desensitized to that. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Yes.
And like it also is, I think, partly a class issue because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people that really care about these issues, like, are not former slaughterhouse workers. Like, we don't know the sort of desperation that
Mm-hmm.
leads people to take these jobs, which isn't because like, oh, I love slaughtering animals. I don't think anyone grows up hoping to slaughter animals as their occupation. You know what I mean? You
Mm-hmm.
have like ballerina and astronaut, you don't have slaughterhouse worker. So I think I totally agree. I think it's coming from a place of empathy for the sort of horrific acts that we see.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Mian. And to go into kind of detail of what you've shown us there in the overview, can you,
Hmm.
yes, further tell us more about the situation, the reality that slaughterhouse workers face today?
Yeah, so I think the first issue that I want to touch on is immigration issues. And I know a lot of your viewers are in Europe, so I don't know exactly what the situation is on in there, but you can probably tell from our last president that like it's very there is not a lot of respect for immigrants in our country, even though like the U.S. was built on immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
And you have this group of people that don't have legal protections. Actually, you know what's really interesting that I read recently too was
Mm-hmm.
how like global trade, globalization, and neoliberalism, and all of these international trade agreements like NAFTA and such that Democrats support as well, have led to a lot of local smaller slaughterhouse operations in, for example, like Mexico and the south of us
Oh,
being shut down, and they're forced to then come to the US and work at like Smithfield and Tyson's, and
oh,
they're literally recruited. So
mm,
not that I support like small slaughterhouses, but it just goes into how like people are set up to be working. Like they didn't choose.
uh-huh.
They have no choice and they're escaping here because they don't really have other options.
Mm-hmm.
So you have this very vulnerable population
Mm-hmm.
that has a linguistic barrier, that has a threat of deportation always hanging over them, and they're very much anti-union. These companies like Smithfield and Tyson's, and then you have them put into this sort of job that is mentally and physically grueling, and they have no means of of reparation, or they have no means of speaking up about their issue. It's like, if you
Uh-huh.
think about it, it's like the perfect population to use for for an industry that you want to keep out of sight, out of mind.
Uh-huh.
It's the
Yeah.
perfect
Their
population. You know what I mean?
profiles, yeah, like people of color, non-citizens, like all,
Hmm.
yeah, I can already see from what you've told us. No.
Yeah, and actually, a really scary thing. I'm not sure if anyone has seen Food Inc., that was like sort of it was like one of the groundbreaking
Yeah,
documentaries about
yeah.
food and capitalism and stuff. Oh, have you watched it?
By what's his name? Oh my God, Michael. No, Food Dot Inc. Right?
Yeah, Food Inc.
Michael
And
Moore. Right?
Michael Pollan. I think Michael Pollan
Michael.
is featured in it, but
Oh, okay. I thought it was by. Okay, no, that's just me. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead. I'm listening. Yeah.
no. I love Michael Moore too.
Hmm.
But what really shocked me was in exchange for, so you have ICE, which
Hmm.
is sort of our border security agents, and you have the corporations, right? The meat corporations.
Hmm.
And in exchange for not deporting people en masse,
Hmm.
the company would rat out their own employees, a couple dozen or so at a time, and ICE would go to those workers in the middle of the night and deport them. And in exchange for promising to not go to the slaughterhouse floor and disrupt operations. So they were like selling away their own employees in exchange for not having their business be disrupted. And these are the employees that, again, they marketed to them. They market to these people, vulnerable people in the South, and ask them to come up to work for Smithfield, and then they just deport them back again as soon as like as sort of like a human pawn
Uh-huh.
in their chess game, I suppose. Like it's they see these people as so disposable. And I mean, you can just read account after account of I was injured, I worked 30 years, 40 years on this job, and I was injured because of this job, and they refuse to provide any compensation, and they just gaslight them into
Hmm.
thinking that it wasn't them. So they like it, and it's not surprising on a more
Oh yeah.
psychological level. Like if you see animals as disposable objects that you can just slaughter and exploit for their bodies, there's a very thin line to cross in seeing humans as disposable.
That is very true. Uh-huh. Wow,
Sorry,
I didn't know
yeah.
about all this surrounding deportation and everything, but then it does make total sense, just like you said right now.
Mm,
Uh-huh. And
yeah.
then in prior conversations, you were mentioning how there's a whole background of history surrounding
Mm,
this issue.
yeah. Oh, wait. One more thing.
Sorry,
I
go
got
ahead.
off track
Hmm.
because
No, don't worry.
we're having too much fun. But or I wouldn't call this conversation fun.
No,
But anyways,
yes.
um, this slaughterhouse work, I think
Hmm.
a question that I get sometimes is like, if let me think. I want to make sure I'm phrasing it correctly because a lot of people do have this question,
Mm.
which is it's sort of an offshoot of the like there's no ethical consumption under capitalism question.
Hmm.
That's like, oh, what's the point of switching from animal products to plant products when they both have human exploitation? And I think that is not understanding the sort of it's not having an intersectional approach. It's treating animals as objects in your analysis of human labor. And so there are unique and uniquely bad, uniquely worse aspects to working in a slaughterhouse, I think, arguably, than working in like a regular manufacturing job. And obviously, both are exploitative, right? Both are stealing the profits and the labor from the worker.
Hmm.
But there is a substantial difference between the two that I think makes the case for why we should be switching, even if we don't have the downfall of capitalism right now.
Hmm.
And the main issues with that are
Hmm.
the rate of injury with slaughterhouse
Hmm.
workers. So in the US, there are around 2 amputations a week in the slaughterhouse industry. So that's like losing your limb. And I know, and as I said, the rate of injury is so much higher, even compared to other
Hmm.
manufacturing. It's 3 times higher than other manufacturing workers, and I think 5 times higher than the average worker. And the mental distress that comes with that. And another thing I learned recently was slaughterhouse work, they're more closer together, like because you have the chain is, or the supply line. What am I trying to
Supply
say?
chain?
Like the, hmm?
Supply chain, yeah.
Yeah, like
Uh-huh.
yeah, like as they're in the
Hmm.
factory,
Hmm.
they're spaced much closer together. So that's why there was, I think in some states, like 10% of COVID cases came from slaughterhouse workers.
Mm.
And that was more states like the Carolinas and
Hmm.
stuff where there are more hogs than people or more pigs than people.
Yeah, crazy.
But
Mm.
and also like going back to this theme of like if they see humans as disposable, they're gonna see animals as disposable. There were so many stories coming out, horrific stories of like and this was actually being covered by the non-vegan media as well, which was like good and surprising. But these managers, like I think it was at Tyson's,
Hmm.
Tyson's betting on which of their workers would get
Hmm.
sick.
I mean,
And
can
yeah,
can you kind of not introduce, but like kind of briefly explain what Tyson
oh,
is, and just for those who are unsure about.
yeah. So around 80% of our chicken farming is done by four corporations.
Is
And
that
I,
only in the US or is
yeah,
it
that's in the
global?
US. That's in the
Okay,
US.
okay, yeah,
Sorry.
just making sure.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's Tyson, Smithfield, Pilgrim's Pride, and I'm pretty sure. But yeah, Smithfield and Tyson's are the main ones.
Uh-huh.
And Tyson, it either got bought out or it was bought by JBS, which is the biggest meat producer in the world. And they're from Brazil.
Uh-huh.
And they've had so many financial scandals
Hmm.
in Brazil. But anyways, and like linked to deforestation in the
Yeah.
Amazon and stuff like that. But yeah, they're all connected. I mean, that's the issue with globalization, right? Is like it's not just domestic and national anymore. It's international corporations that control basically the entire supply chain. I mean, I'm sure in Europe you're getting a lot of meat that's from, like
Hmm.
the soya deforested from the Amazon or maybe even directly the beef.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
Um,
No, sorry.
so,
Yeah.
oh, no. Wait, so now I can go into the more historical context of this because I think, like I said, there's such a big gap. And I like, do you feel that too? Like, just this enormous gap between everyday people that sort of walk around in their lives and are consuming these products and the people that make them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Hmm. No, because um, in our daily lives, like when you go to a supermarket, like all all these like meats are all kind of packaged in such kind of like a in a way that makes it look really sanitary, like in the cling
Mm-hmm.
film and then the plastic, and there's just
Mm-hmm.
that perfect piece of meat and everything. And I mean, not only meat, there's the dairy products and all that with like the
Mm-hmm.
photos of like happy cows and like happy farmers,
I
right?
know, I know.
Uh,
Yeah.
then honestly, like it is like the world makes it so difficult for kind of normal consumers to kind of you know be woke about this situation of people who physically have to deal with animal like factory farming. Hmm.
100%. Actually, going off that point, there was an interesting, it was either a study or a book called like the, how was it? It was like the nature of meat or something. And it was basically making the argument that
Hmm.
as we've like moved forward in time as civilizations, basically, meat has resembled less and less the actual animal. And I know like vegans talk about this
Uh-huh.
all the time, but it's like interesting to think of how it's been a sort of progression over time. Like it hasn't always been this way. I mean, people used to hunt and they would see the animal and be very connected, I think, more to the reality of killing.
Yeah.
And and then we had sort of like the rotisserie chicken and turkey, and those are going more and more out of fashion. Like you see those more in vintage ads.
Yeah.
And now it's like the chicken nuggets and that are shaped in like other animals, like
Yeah.
dinosaurs, which
Dinosaurs.
I
Yeah.
is so
Honestly.
weird.
Yeah.
And ground meat, which who knows what is in that. But yeah, I think it's the increased distance. Actually, yeah, but I'll be talking about how this distance or this classist dynamic, and this is actually what I made my most recent infographic on,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
about sort of, oh, I think actually in this infographic, I didn't have the chance to go into the history, so I am going to go into it now. So that's exciting. But we're both Japanese, and in Japan, you often think of like I feel like in Japan there's this image of like not having it's like having a very homogenous society. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But in reality, it's like you peel back one layer and it's not like that. And so there were a class of people during the Edo period, I think, that were called the Eta. So there's like Eta and Hining. And Eta were sort of because Hining was actually you had to do some sort of crime, which like obviously I don't believe in like you are cast away from society because of a crime, so that's not good either. But at that, it was like literally a class you were born
Yeah,
into, right? And they had their own neighborhoods that they could live in, and also the jobs that they could take. They had a limited set of jobs, and a lot of that was slaughterhouse work. And actually, something that's really interesting about this is I noticed with historical examples, like people that societies that have the most divide between the slaughterhouse workers, like they have a separate class or a caste system for slaughterhouse workers, are the societies that actually have the most awareness, in a sense, about like animal slaughter. And so Japan had this because of Buddhist roots, right?
yeah,
Like killing animals was seen as bad, and actually eating meat was banned in Japan for like a millennium.
yeah.
So yeah, so it that's why there was like the separate class in Japan. And
Mhm.
also in India, the untouchables were the ones that were forced to do the sort of slaughter and leather work.
Yeah.
And it's the same in Tibet, which, so this is from, again, from a Buddhist sort of root. But professional butchers were the members of the lowest class because they violate the Buddhist tenet of killing.
Mhm.
And this is actually a lot of these examples are from Melanie Joy's book, Why We, have you read it? Do you know what I'm talking about? It's like, I love the title. It's Why We Love Dogs, uh, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows. So it's like going into the
Mm,
speciesist
yeah.
aspect.
Hmm.
But the other example was butchers of the ancient Guanches of the Canary Island weren't allowed to enter others' homes or associate with those who weren't butchers. So it was like a very sharp divide.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
and also, one of my favorite examples is why the historical reason for why we call, in English at least, like beef and maybe steak, but I know beef for sure, beef and pork and like veal and venison and stuff like that are different from the animal names, is because the French invaded England in the 1400s,
Hmm.
and I think they were in Normandy at the time. They were French, but
Yeah.
they invaded the England or that the UK area, and so the names that we have for the meat are are of French origin because
Uh-huh.
they're the ones
Yeah.
eating it,
Uh-huh.
and then the names for the animals are obviously in like UK English.
Hmm.
So I always thought that was interesting. Like it's
Hmm.
literally always been this like literally embedded in our language
Yeah.
is this gap between the slaughterer and the consumer.
Hmm.
But yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, the history is like often we don't like have a chance to kind of look back on to kind of like, the history surrounding slaughterhouse workers and everything. But then,
Mhm.
for example, when we talk about like when you mentioned like the eta hining, like it
Mhm.
kind of it reminded me of when I learned about them in my first year of high school, I think. I learned in my Japanese
Mm.
class about how there used to be kind of a book called Buraku Shukan. Like, and
Mm.
it was valid until like very recently, like I don't know, up till like late 90s. Um, I think there were a few companies who used it was basically like almost like a telephone book, but
Mhm.
then would include kind of the addresses of the places like where people of Eta Hining come from.
Mhm.
So
Oh
then,
my God.
yeah, kind of
In
discriminate.
the telephone book?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have like telephone number, but then it is like a telephone book. Like if there's like a certain family name, like for
Mhm.
example, my surname is Kimura. So if there's Kimura from this certain part of like I don't know Hokkaido, they would be a
Mhm.
part of this. kind of slaughterhouse working, kind of lower class clan and all that.
I see. But it's like public information for
Yeah,
everyone to
yeah.
see.
It is all kind of summarized in a book that is
Hmm.
available to all these, corporations. Uh-huh.
Wait, sorry, my phone, I swear I started off with 84% battery, but it's like already dying. So I was
No
just
worries.
getting my
No worries.
charger.
Uh-huh.
Okay,
Could
yeah,
you?
yeah. Yeah.
Oh, is it me?
But yeah, that is so like
Mm-hmm.
there's so much because it's both I would say it's ethnicity and not race. So I'm not sure if it's racism, but it's definitely class. And like this is what's so frustrating. Like, do you get comments a lot too about like, oh, veganism is so classist?
Yeah.
Because I get that all the time too. And it's like, what's classist is like having other people do dirty work that a lot of people don't want to do themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And like them being from very vulnerable groups like immigrants and having less social capital, et cetera, et cetera.
That reminds me of the question that we did talk about in our private conversations about like
Hmm.
I mean, as you've mentioned, like not I mean, we are often called classist by like I mean certain people and all that, but then not everyone can as easily go vegan or
Yeah,
like can cut out cut out animal products. So then
right.
um could you kind of um tell us how can going vegan be a viable solutions to these problems?
Yeah, I love this question because I get stuff about like, what about like food apartheid or what about inaccessibility to fruits and vegetables? And it's like,
Yeah.
that is not in that's not a counterpoint to veganism at all. Like, if anything, it stresses the importance of veganism as a food justice movement because obviously I want it to be easier for people to go
No.
vegan. Like, I don't just want people to go vegan without like I want it to be easy and I want there to be support.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact of the matter is that the government is very much working against that. So like we think of government as there to make sure to promote healthy guidelines and to make healthy foods accessible, like
Mm-hmm.
working for the public interest, which would be human health,
Yeah.
if not also environmental health.
Mm-hmm.
And it's doing the exact opposite. I mean, like, are we surprised at this point, like with
Uh,
the government being captured by industry? But the one of the most shocking things I saw, so a lot of the issues with how the government works with regard to perpetuating food injustice is related to dairy. The dairy industry is super powerful in the US. And actually, I'm not sure if you've heard of this, but there are giant cheese caves underground. So the government just buys up a bunch of cheese and they put it into underground. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but
wow.
you can look it up and you can see the
Cheese
cheese
cave.
caves.
Oh my.
And they also just buy up like millions of dollars of dairy too. And the government and the
Mm-hmm.
industry is always like, why can't you buy up all of our surplus? And this
Uh-huh.
is what annoys me so much because you have this sort of like
Mm-hmm.
conservative side that is always saying like the invisible hand of the market and everything is going to turn out the way it should be because of market. Biggest government intervention being
Mm-hmm.
done is not to like help poor people, it's to help industry, it's to help corporations, and specifically in this case to help animal
Mm-hmm.
agriculture industries. And so
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the USDA guidelines, which determine
Yeah.
how, people, probably everyone in America knows what I'm talking about, but like the food pyramid or the My Plate with the different food groups. Do you have those in Europe as well, like the government dietary
Uh-huh.
guidelines?
Uh-huh. They do. I think there's one for the whole of EU. Then
Oh,
I know,
okay.
but I am sure. Yeah, there is like one for France as well. Yeah.
Do you know if they have dairy as a food group?
Yeah. I mean,
Mm.
certain countries such as what was it? Denmark, I think,
Mm-hmm.
have like their own kind of food plate. Does not include dairy,
Mm.
dairy or no meat or dairy. Yeah,
Yeah.
the two, I think. Yeah.
Actually, the US recently changed ours from meat to protein as one of the food
Okay.
groups. but we still have dairy. And actually, Canada got rid of dairy
Hmm.
a couple
Yeah.
of years ago.
Hmm.
And if you
Hmm.
think about it, like there's no reason. And actually, even the US dairy, okay, I'm not sure how I feel. I know how I feel about this. I don't like it. But like the US dairy, if you look at the USDA website, they list up soy milk as like one of the things that you can have as your dairy, but like people aren't going to be thinking of that when they see
Yeah.
dairy, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it's like very hidden.
That's very.
Um,
Hmm.
and like dairy is not a nutritional food group. Like I would understand if it was like calcium or something like that, but dairy is not like cow's breast milk is not necessary to us any more than like any other random species. You know what I mean? So it's
Hmm.
crazy that we
So
have that as a food
misleading
group.
for like
It
the
is so
whole
misleading.
culture of like, calcium equals dairy and dairy equals calcium. Like,
I know.
this is,
And we all know of the study that's like actually the rates of dairy consumption and osteoporosis, like how like
mm,
a bone disease are um or I'm not, am I saying positively or negative? But anyways, like the more dairy you drink, the more likely you are to have
yeah, yeah,
osteoporosis.
very
So
strong
it's
positive correlation. Yeah.
yeah, because there is I think it was like lactic acid that
Hmm.
counteracts the sort of benefits. But yeah, so institutional and what really bothers me about this too is so the USDA guidelines, a lot of people don't listen to them. Like it's not super important what's on the My
Yeah.
Plate graphic. People aren't going to the USDA website.
Mm-hmm.
But this guideline determines how we build up the menus for food aid. So um, programs like TARP, programs like the National School Lunch Program, which,
Yeah.
okay, actually, interesting fact, the National School Lunch Program was literally founded after World War II when we had so much surplus food, especially surplus meat. And so it wasn't even done out of like the goodness of, I think it was Truman, goodness of the government's heart. It was just because like they had a bunch of surplus industrial, like
Yeah.
mostly animal products that they were like, we need to put this
Mhm.
somewhere. So let's start the National School Lunch Program. But anyways,
Yeah, Japan
um,
as well, like after World War II, like all the surplus from the US just like went to like Japanese,
I
school lunches.
know, I know. And
We're so into this. Yeah.
there were
Mhm.
actually cases of like Japanese people getting sick because they hadn't eaten meat and they just continued putting the meat into the school lunches. Like it was colonialism at its peak, truly.
And also
Uh,
the fact that like what was it, 72-3% of adults in like Japanese adults are
mhm.
lactose intolerant. Yeah,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
like you just ask my kind of like Japanese friend group, like like what do you like? Are any of you lactose intolerant? Like,
Hmm.
for example, if I talk to literally like 20 of them, I would hardly like see any hands probably just because
Mm,
people don't realize that stomach cramps, like migraines, like
yeah,
that, are signs of lactose intolerance. Like it
that is so true.
it is. It's
Wait, are you lactose intolerant?
I
Do you
am.
know?
I am.
Oh, okay.
Hmm.
Yeah, like I think, and actually there's a growing movement to call it lactose tolerance rather than lactose intolerant because it's sort of like, if you think about it, the global majority, so people of color are the majority on Earth,
Yeah.
are lactose intolerant. So labeling it almost as like, it sort of pathologizes it. It almost says like, this is some
Yeah.
illness or disease or condition that you have. So actually, like, I think there's a movement to call it lactose normal. Like, if you're lactose intolerant, you're just lactose normal because
Does make a lot
why?
of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, like, why should you be, like, you should be intolerant to like the milk of another species. Um, but
Mm.
yeah, so there's so much. So these guidelines
Hmm.
determine a lot of food aid. And what is very concerning is that people that are most reliant upon this food
Yeah.
aid
Uh-huh.
are the people that are most likely to be lactose intolerant. So, like people of color.
Hmm.
And so it's this vicious cycle of they literally had to sue a couple years ago the USDA, the board that decides the USDA food guidelines. They were sued
Uh-huh.
for having industry experts, they're not even experts, like industry people on the board that were deciding what's healthy. So, like people literally from the egg industry, and they
Hmm.
eventually backed down, but it was people from, I think, a lot of like junk food corporations as well, like Coca-Cola and stuff like that. But these are the people like deciding what's healthy. And disproportionately deciding what's healthy for people that are reliant upon government aid. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's really like
Wow.
we take all the trash of society, like the trashy food of society, and we're just shoving it down the throats of people that don't have any choice but to accept that food because they can't get food elsewhere because
These
they're being
children
exploited.
are
I
so
know.
vulnerable. Yeah, like to all
Yeah.
this. It's terrible. Mm.
Yeah. I actually wait, did you ever live in the US?
Yes, I for 4.5 years.
Okay. Did you ever have like a school lunch?
The thing is, I didn't go to like a normal American school.
Right, right, right.
But then, yeah, no, hearing my friends kind of like conversations about, our school lunch, it was, mm,
It was disgusting. Like I went to a public school in Maryland, but like and also the fact that like I didn't have this experience, but like there's a common Asian American experience of like getting made fun of for your
yeah,
food, for your ethnic food.
I
And
have
so
that. Mm,
I was never made fun of, but I did feel the pressure to like buy the white kids' school lunch,
mm,
which is so like horrible because like you're being shamed out of the food that is better for your body, that is more fitting to your own like racial demographic,
yeah,
and
mm,
being shamed into like assimilating in a way that is literally physically harmful for you
yeah,
if
no,
you're lactose
pepperoni
intolerant.
pizza, like, like
Yeah.
PB&J, like, yes, it doesn't, I mean, PB&J, like, it does have a place in my heart somehow. But then, yeah, like, I don't know, I experienced that as a child as well, and I was like ashamed of
Mm,
kind of like, bringing rice bowls
mm,
in, because like,
yeah, yeah.
they'd say it
It's
like smells different or whatever, but then honestly, yeah, no,
I'm glad we're having this cultural conversation now, though. I feel like people are more aware of like it's not okay to bully kids for their school lunches.
no,
So
honestly,
I'm glad that that change is happening.
yeah.
But so going back to your original question,
Mm,
though, like it's hard to go vegan, and I think it's important for the vegan movement
mm,
to recognize that as
yeah,
well, that it's not equally easy for everyone to go vegan or to go
yeah,
plant-based. That's simply not the reality of the matter. And you can have different conversations around like, well, people should still go plant-based anyways because it's a moral imperative. But I
mhm,
think when you look at the reality, like the practical reality of this of the matter, it's like it's much quicker to just create an environment that's easier, that is almost default vegan or vegetarian or plant-based, and much less make it harder. And they've actually done studies on this too about
mhm,
like price parity, or like at what point with the cost of the animal versus the plant product will people choose the plant product.
mm,
And it wasn't equal price. Like the plant
okay,
product had to be cheaper for people to choose the plant product. And so that's where we need to be getting at.
yeah,
Um, and we're not, because the government is subsidizing like meat and dairy.
mhm,
And I think that, and I think this is not a controversial thing to say at all, like they should be subsidizing plant-based food because
yeah,
that's the food that's actually addressing the public interest. Like, why do we have government? You know what I mean? Like, why do we have government? It's not to prop up specific industries, because and people will use the job argument, but
mhm,
you can have a job in other industries as well. Like
oh,
other
yeah,
like the plant-based industry, we need people working in the plant-based industry as
yeah,
well. So solely to prop up a job is not a good enough reason, because you can have jobs in other industries, but
mhm,
the environmental benefits can't be replicated from industry to industry in the same way. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And so I think it's really important that like we have a more like an empathetic conversation as well, with like I understand people's fears about losing their job, which is like what we talked about at the beginning with slaughterhouse workers too. And the thing is like it's actually vegan organizations that are working the hardest to get that transition, so like to transition animal farmers to plant-based farming. I
mhm,
only see vegan organizations covering this. And so when anti-vegans come in and they're like what about the jobs, what about jobs, it's like you are not doing anything about this. Like it's always vegan, or it's like Vegan Justice League. I've seen Mercy for Animals cover this issue. I've seen there is like the new legislation that's passed, I think, that there's like anti-factory farming legislation. It's not like anti-vegans that are making sure we make this transition, adjust, and equitable, and it's a vegan organization. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really important to note. But yeah, I see like there's literally no purpose
Uh-huh.
to propping up the meat and dairy industry. Like it's not in the public interest at all to do
Mm-hmm.
this.
Mm-hmm.
And public uh, there's an immense public stake at helping the burgeoning plant-based sector. Like there's public health. Literally, our global pandemic that we're all in right now was started through like exploitation of animals. Like if we're going to see that there's a public interest in doing anything, it's definitely to promote plant-based food. And the fact that we're not only not doing that, but we're doing the opposite of that is truly mind-blowing. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, no, honestly, like, yeah, all these subsidies for like the dairy milk industry just it really shows that there's a lot of like, kind of money moving at the back, with all the it it is pretty obvious and it's very disappointing to see this happen.
Literally the fact that Congress people are allowed to have stocks in the US is ridiculous. Like you are supposed to be making public legislation for the public interest, which would be for the environment, for people's health, and you have a private stake in this matter. Like
Mm.
it's just and the revolving door too. I think we don't talk enough about the revolving door, how people just leave government and then get a cushy job in the corner office and they're set for the rest of their lives. Like
Uh-huh.
I don't
Uh-huh.
know, sometimes like I think of these people and I like people like us. I feel like just really everyday people.
Hmm.
I can't like we can't understand that level of
Hmm.
greed to just be
No.
like I don't care about the planet. I don't care about people's health. I don't care about animals, like billions of animals. I like this cushy corner office job is more important, like just for me. Like I really can't understand, but I don't know.
No. Yeah, honestly, yeah. Maybe we should move on to our next question. There is so
Yeah,
much we want to cover. Is there any?
yeah. Oh, it's already 11:14.
Uh-huh, no, how time flies. Would you, would you, if we were to pick, would you like to go into more into environmental racism or gender?
Mm,
Sorry
I
that.
think
Uh-huh.
yeah, for the last topic, um, I think actually I can actually touch upon both of these very quickly, I think, because they're much smaller topics. Um, I think so
Mm-hmm.
environmental racism, it's the same as with any other sort of issue with environmental racism, which is just toxic facilities are disproportionately placed in communities of color and low-income communities. And this is not unique to the meat industry, but I think maybe what would be unique when you go near these farms, the stench is just so bad. It hangs on your clothes. It's like kids that live in these areas, they go to school and they're made fun of because they carry that stench with them of slaughter, of death, of manure. And I it, it's not like something to brush off living near one of these bits. So they have a medium-sized farm produces as much manure as like a city of I think it was like 500,000 people. Like animals just excrete a
Uh-huh.
ton. And right now we don't and this is another thing. Okay, before I get too off topic again, but like people are always, we need animal farming because we need their manure to fertilize. Like it's part of the agricultural system. Like we need fertilizer from animals. And it's like right now we have so much manure, like we don't know what to do with it, and it's being pumped into these lagoons. It's literally the leading cause of river and ocean pollution. Like we have way too much right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not really a necessity right now
Yeah.
for why we should prop up animal agriculture. But anyways, so yeah, so we have these lagoons full of animal manure, and that's really the issue with environmental racism. And
Mm-hmm.
then the thing with gender was so first you have the toxic masculinity in meat. So around 70% of vegetarians and vegans are women. And it's also the same within the movement as well. So most of the people within the animal protection movement are women, although you'll see in leadership, it's often like white men, which is changing. It's changing. So that's good. But and also the second part, so it's the toxic masculinity in men and men not feeling comfortable or uh, comfortable gives them too much credit, I feel like, but men shying away from choosing. There's actually even a study that men didn't want to recycle because they thought it made them look gay, which is homophobic,
Yeah.
but also like so dumb.
Hmm.
And it's the same thing with like this idea of like, I am a hunter, I'm a consumer, like I
Wow.
consume
Yeah.
live beings um, as this sort of like manly thing. When it's also like they're just going to the grocery store usually too. So,
No, oh my God,
um,
it hurts me so much that it makes sense. The fact that I can nod to this because it is so true that toxic masculinity relates to so many of like how it I feel like many men feel like they'll lose their masculinity. Oops, my window. Um, masculinity
mhm.
for like being conscious about these issues, and it is like a very vicious cycle that can't it no it cannot continue like this.
I know it really can, and there is a really good point made by this activist like Earthling Ed, which probably a lot of people know, but that the idea, even if you're going to buy the premise of like, I am sort of like the protector, I am the provider, like the masculine role,
Hmm.
that does not mesh at all with eating meat. Like if you're actually a protector of like our environment and of people's health and
Hmm.
of safety for everyone,
Hmm.
and helping like protecting the vulnerable, it
Yeah,
is not to go after like the most vulnerable group, which is animals that like literally can't do anything against you.
yeah.
You know what I
It's
mean?
so
Like,
ironic that
yeah, it's so ironic that like you're so fragile in your masculinity. Like it is fragile masculinity. It's toxic, but it's also fragile
yeah.
masculinity. That
Sorry.
is the issue,
Mm.
which I mean is the patriarchy. So you can't blame individual men, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I can.
Yeah. Do you want to move into the action items then maybe?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay.
So um our final question will be what are some action items and how would you say our viewers who are willing to make change are
Mhm.
able to combat this issue surrounding exploitation of humans in factory farms.
Yeah, so I think the real core thing that I want to stress is like we didn't go, or I'm pretty sure because we're both, we happen to both be vegan, but like I know I didn't go vegan overnight. And did you?
No, not at
Or
all. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I think that is actually there's actually this term for it called, sorry, can you hear my roommates outside?
Uh,
No?
no,
Okay,
it's
okay.
you can hardly. Yeah. No.
Okay, okay. Which is it's called vegan amnesia. There's a term for the way that vegans psychologically process their own journey
Mhm.
towards veganism, um, which is that they think like, oh, I went vegan overnight because after the fact of going vegan, like we see our worldview changes so much that like we see that as the default and we can't imagine like not being vegan or not going vegan. But the actual, if you look at actual studies and actual reported behavior, um, it shows that people go vegan, like very few people go vegan, like the sort of overnight vegan narrative that we see being pushed a lot is actually more of a false narrative. And a lot of people go vegan very slowly. But I mean, all that is to say, not even that like your end goal has to be to go vegan, but it's to have grace for ourselves. I think when we're absorbing this new information, it's like you're not a bad person or whatever for not making changes right away. Like
Yeah.
our values and our actions are going to be what is it, like inharmonious in this sort of society that like encourages very unethical behavior. Like when the default behavior and when the behavior that's encouraged and socially accepted is this one thing, it's totally understandable to have fallen into that. And yeah, so I think that's like a very important point to say about like the sort of action item of going vegan. And I don't even want to stress that action item the most. I think there are four things actually that I wrote down as action items. And the first one is sort of like reducing your animal product intake when you can. So actually flexitarian. Have you heard of flexitarianism?
To be flexible with your diet in terms of amount.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and actually flexitarian, so like we've seen a huge rise in animal in plant products like everywhere, like Dunkin' Donuts, Burger King, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. And 90+% of the consumers of those products are meat eaters. So essentially, they're flexitarians,
Hmm.
people that, and so I think the flexitarian consumer base is the driving force behind the rise of veganism. So not to like that demographic should never be understated. Like to be
Hmm.
honest, vegans, I mean, I say this as a vegan myself, but like our consumer demographic is not that important. Like we're
Hmm.
not really like what companies are going
No,
for
no, yeah.
because yeah, like they are marketing towards flexitarians, and so increasing flexitarians should be a huge priority if we're
Hmm.
thinking about like how to strategically move towards a world away from animal exploitation.
Hmm.
And the second part is not even so that the individual change is only a small one part of that, and the three other things that I want to talk about are political change. And so our we don't have we don't have a single law, for example, protecting chickens in the US. Like not a single law. We have the Animal Welfare Act, and it doesn't cover animals raised for slaughter. And it includes animal testing, which is like a secondary issue, but it doesn't even include most of the animals included in animal testing.
Hmm.
Like all of this is to say that our legal protections of animals are so lackluster and so behind public opinion. Like people, if you poll people, they care about animals. They even care about animals raised for meat. Like there was even a study that was like 42% of people support a ban on slaughterhouses. Like people,
Really?
yeah, like I mean, people obviously are not connecting that to their own actions, but like
No, yeah.
people would support policy change. There's so much more policy change that could happen. And so making sure you're voting and making sure when you're interacting with your congresspeople and your politicians that you're making sure that this is an issue on their radar, like factory farming. And a lot of this is should be done in tangent with like workers' unions and other justice movements. I think that makes
Hmm.
our political movements stronger. And then the third thing is how we talk about these issues. So when veganism comes up in conversation, how do you talk about it? Because the social perception of veganism is so hard. Like, what is your perception of like how conversations about veganism go?
Honestly, I get judged a lot most of the time just because people are like, oh, how can you do this? Like, like where do you get your protein from? Like, what? How are you not dying? And I mean, okay, that was an exaggeration. They don't ask how I'm dying, but then they seem genuinely like non-vegans. Many non-vegans genuinely seem concerned about my well-being when I'm actually concerned about their well-being.
Oh my
But
God.
yeah, that's another.
90% of
But
Oh
yeah.
no, I was gonna say 90% of Americans are not eating enough vegetables. Like they should be worried about their own health for sure. Not protein. Like it's like it's always like where do you get your protein? Like where are you getting your fiber? You know what I mean? Like most Americans are fiber deficient. Um, but yeah, I think it's like it's how vegans talk about veganism and and there's a lot of pick me. Do you know pick me veganism? It's like I'm vegan, but
Oh
veganism is
yeah.
so stupid. Like vegans bashing veganism to socially fit in, which I understand the urge, but I think we should all fight that urge and we should not be bashing veganism for no reason. Like it's obviously like we should be critiquing it when our community is our movement is going the wrong way. But like there's a lot of like I'm vegan, but like I hate all vegans. Vegans are all so annoying, blah blah blah, and like really bashing veganism. And it's like they're not gonna pick you. They're not gonna pick you. It's like goes back to feminism. It's like the pick me girl.
Yeah,
But
yeah. Not
yeah,
like
but I
the
think
girls kind of. Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
so I think it's how vegans talk about veganism, and I think it's also how non-vegans talk about veganism is very important too. Like when it comes up in conversation, are you gonna join in and like make fun of vegans, or are you gonna be like, are you gonna invite people to a vegan restaurant maybe? Like there's so many ways to change that social narrative.
Hmm.
And the last thing is, I mean, if people can, is to donate, whether it be money or time. There are so many great organizations out there. So I'm just going to plug the Humane League, uh, which is an organization that you can take really fast, quick actions for animals. And it's like digital actions against factory farming specifically. So it should be pretty widely like applicable to people's interests or their values. But yeah, like even doing little bits of volunteering or even following these organizations and making sure that they're information and like updates on this issue are in your sphere of information and how you get information about the world, I think is really. Do you have any organizations to plug actually that you feel like are really good on this educational level?
Uh-huh. I really, I think I need to search more about kind of, I mean, since our topic is kind of like I feel like our conversation today kind of made me realize that I need to do more research on if there are organizations trying to support kind of um, these non-immigrant people of color, people working at slaughterhouses that do the job for, not out of choice, and
Mm,
like,
hmm.
but I definitely do believe, I mean, obviously, like, if we do support organizations, just like you mentioned, like fighting, like against, kind of not fighting, but then trying to end kind of factory farming, it does
Hmm.
naturally mean that these jobs will be kind of converted to kind of more, yeah, jobs, in the plant industry, plant product industry, and
Hmm.
yeah, that would naturally make the change. But no,
Hmm.
no, I do believe the same with like the organizations you just mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I would say Humane League, and also I know platforming more like by POC creators, like Veg Fest is like a great account and organization as well. And I know Food Empowerment Project, but I really like THL because I think they make it really easy to do fast, like you can only spend like 20 minutes a week on their fast action network and like take really effective change for animals. So yeah, but I mean any organization that floats your boat I think is great.
Thank you, Mian. Yeah, there's only 1 minute because this video can't be longer than 1 hour for me in
Oh
order
yeah, yeah, of
to
course.
post on YouTube. But then yeah, we did have our last kind of bit, but then we will make sure to do that like another time. But thank you
Yeah,
so
no,
much.
I think this will be a perfect ending. I think we got it right in the hour.
We did. Thank you so
Okay,
much for
thanks
joining
for
us.
having me.
Have a great day.
Thanks, you too. Have a good day, everyone.
See you. Bye.
Should I just X out? Bye.
Yeah.